The topic for tonight really is a topic for a year's study, loving God and having awe or fear of God. I want to talk about some details which and some potential problems with the two mitzvahs together, which I think if we can solve the problems will shed a light on the whole complex that can be grasped in one sitting and is not often contained in discussions of loving and fearing God. The Rambam describes how to achieve love and fear of God. Describes it in the Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Yesod Torah, Perek Beis, Halacha Beis, second chapter of the laws of the fundamentals of the Torah, and also in the Sefer Mitzvos, the third positive mitzvah. And the descriptions are not exactly the same. Thank you very much, that'll be good. And usually, if there's a difference of expression between the Sefer HaMitzvos on the one hand and the Mishnah Torah on the other hand, since the Mishnah Torah was written later, we would say that the Mishnah Torah is the more authentic view of what the Rambam believed, because he probably changed his mind. In this case, I would resist that interpretation, because what he says in the Sefer HaMitzvos is so fundamental. He brings it from a rabbinic source. It's very hard to believe that he gave it up. So I think that the correct interpretation is that for some reason the way that the Mishnah Torah is oriented, its particular focus meant that this material from the Sefer Mitzvahs he left out. Not that he changed his mind and rejected it. Nowhere does he change his mind and say that he rejects it. So I'm going to present it as a kind of synthesis between the two of them. I'm saying this for you and also for the people who may watch and who may know something about these works and how they're related. I don't want to be misunderstood. Thank you very much. So he says in Yesod Torah, God, the noble and awesome, is awesome and noble God. It's a mitzvah to love him, and a mitzvah to have yira. Now, yira in Hebrew can mean both fear, like what you would feel crossing Times Square blindfolded at noon, and it can mean awe, a sense of overwhelming greatness, and it can mean the two together. And it's my understanding here that the word yira in Hebrew means both, so it's fear and awe. As the verse says, you shall love Hashem, your God, and it says, Hashem, your God, you shall have yira for. Those are the two commandments. What is the way to love and to yira? When someone analyzes, meditates on, concentrates on, focuses on his actions and his creatures, his astonishing actions and creatures, great actions and creatures, and will see from them his wisdom, which is beyond all description, beyond all evaluation, and beyond all end. So here he talks about his actions and his creatures. Now really, his creatures are a subset of his actions. Creatures are things that he created, and his creating is some of the things that he does. But he's putting heavy emphasis on those two things that a person should think about, analyze, and meditate on. In the Sefer HaMitzvos, he says, we should nisbonein, of course this is a translation from the Arabic, we should analyze, focus on, meditate on, and come to understand his mitzvos. the mitzvahs that he commanded us, the Torah that he gave us, and his actions, until we come to grasp him. And he says in the Nevuchim that grasping God's actions is grasping him, and he has an explicit verse that backs that up. So when you think in your mind, well, a person is not the same as his actions, that's true. A person is not the same as his actions. But in the case of the Creator, grasping his actions is called grasping him, because we can't get any further than that. That's all there is to grasp. And anyway, so now the focus of meditation and analysis, attention, is actions in general, creatures, and the Torah that he gave us. We come to understand his wisdom from those studies. Immediately he loves and praises and desires, a great desire, to know this great being. And he quotes King David. The beginning of understanding causes a person to want to come closer and want to come to a greater understanding. Then, as he's in this process of drawing closer and understanding more, then there's another perspective. When he thinks of these things themselves, immediately he is propelled backwards with yira and pachad. Pachad is pure fear. And he knows that he is a tiny creature, low, dark, standing with pitifully weak brain, mind, logic, understanding, standing before that which is absolutely complete and perfect. So the Rambam here pictures a kind of pendulum effect. First, there's the attraction of something which is great, and the wisdom is beautiful, the way which things come together, and the kind of explanations you get, the depth you get into understanding things, and it attracts you to achieve other greater understanding. And if you put in what he says in the Sefer Mitzvos, the mitzvahs are what he commanded us to do. So part of understanding them would be understanding what they do for us, what they do to us, from which you could read his care for us, in addition to reading it in the way in which he created the world. All of that, it's coming to know the Creator as an agent. Knowing the Creator as an agent means knowing what he's doing, and to a certain extent why he's doing it. All that leads to love, until a focus of comparison comes into effect, where you say, okay, I want to know him because of his greatness and his exquisite quality, but who am I to know him? Who am I to draw close to him? Who am I to have any connection with him? Who am I to have any relationship with him? That sense of disparity, that sense of distance, of overwhelming greatness, is an expression of yira in the sense of awe. Something's awesome precisely because it's not ordinary. Something's awesome to me precisely because it's beyond my imagination what capacity there could be to produce such a thing. And that means the awe is an expression of my distance from it. So this is the picture that you get at first glance. Now, someone in the 20th century made the remark about somebody else who was talking about this Rambam, that there's got to be something wrong here, because this pictures a person always in an incomplete state. Either you're drawing close, or you're suddenly focusing on the difference between you and the Creator, and then you're drawing back. You can't be drawing close and drawing back at the same time. They're opposites. So it sounds like it's a kind of pendulum effect. And whoever he was criticizing, he said, you're painting a picture of a person who's never shalem. He's never integrated. And indeed, these are both mitzvos. Kodesh Baruch Hu commanded us both of them. It's not plausible to say that Kodesh Baruch Hu set up a system that's inherently impossible. Because when you're feeling and expressing love, you're drawing close, and when you're feeling and expressing yira, you're drawing away, and you're never expressing both of them. Certainly not to the maximum degree. They'll be incompatible to the maximum degree. So that's very. I can't say it's out and out contradiction, but it's not the way we describe it. Kodesh Baruch Hu. We're setting up a system with commandments, and the commandments are impossible to fulfill. That's not the way we understand it, because Baruch Hu's wisdom and the way He created the world. I think the first solution is the Rambam here is not describing doing them or having them. He's describing the way in which to develop them. The development process may be a give and take process. The development process may be that when you're working on love, then at that time you're not working on awe. When you're working on awe, you're not working on love, because in the process of developing them, the developing of the one excludes the developing of the other. But that leaves it open that at the end of the development period, you could have both of them, and you could have both of them full force. It doesn't follow that we're describing the totality of a human life. We're describing the initial stage of a human life where they're still under development. Or I should say, it could be piecemeal. You could be working on the development of, let's give arbitrary numbers, out of 100, on the first 50, and maybe working the first 50, you've got to go on a seesaw process to the point where you get 50 of one and 50 of the other, and those two 50s are compatible, and they can live together, and you start working to the next 50. And therefore, again, it's a seesaw process. But the seesaw is built into the developmental process, not into the product. Okay, that's very abstract. But what I want to suggest to you, there are sources that say that there's a certain type of year that grows out of love, a certain type of year that can only be achieved after you've achieved love, and it grows out of it naturally. And I would like to say that there's a certain way in which love grows out of yira, together with another ingredient. What I want to say is that the way in which they will live together is because each one has a way of generating the other. And the additional ingredient is a given ingredient that's obvious, so that you can put it in free without changing the picture. So, the Gemara in Soto describes Abraham and Job. And they're both described as having yira for God. In both cases, the Gemara says, their yira grew out of their love. How does that work? Very simply. If you have a love relationship with someone, anyone, it could be the Creator, it could be any person, a love relationship is very precious. And if there's any danger to it, you will have fear of losing that love relationship. But of course, you can only fear losing a love relationship if you have the love relationship. So this fear can only come after love. The fear is not so much being afraid of him, but it is an expression of awe, because having a relationship, a love relationship with something like that, this will come out in the second point, it's a terribly terrible thing to lose. So this fear is built on awe in a certain way, and it's an addition to the love that's already achieved, because you can't be afraid of losing something unless you have it. That's one half. The other half works like this. I want you to imagine that you get an invitation to a birthday party. Now, there are many different people who could send it. Your neighbor from down the street, whom you pass in the street casually, you may see him once every 2 weeks or something. Or your cousin, who lives across town. Or the mayor of the town, for whom you may have considerable respect and a certain amount of reverence, he's dedicated, and he cares, and he's using his power creatively to help people, or from some scientist who's working to create something that mankind needs, and he's benefiting a great number of the people of mankind. You're invited to his birthday party. Once upon a time, at the top of the ladder would be the President of the United States. I don't think we can use those people anymore as our heroes. At the top of would be someone who's a real hero, a world hero, someone that everybody reveres. These different invitations will affect you in different ways. The fellow from down the street that we see once every 2 weeks, as we say in Hebrew, Osheken Shalom, either go or won't go. Not very important. As you go up, the invitation becomes more precious. Why does the invitation become more precious? Because of the greatness of the one who's sending the invitation. The greater the person who's sending the invitation is, the more impact the invitation has on you. The more you're drawn to answer the invitation positively. If you get up high enough, receiving the invitation is a privilege. You feel privileged to have received that invitation. I don't know if you've ever witnessed this. When the President of the United States signs a bill into law, usually on the lawn of the White House, all the people who work for the law are there and they're all applauding and everything else, and he's signing, signing the bill. Now just imagine you're standing there. You also worked on the bill. He takes his pen, he starts to write, and it runs out of ink. And he says, "Does anybody have a pen?" And you say, "Mr. President, yes, I have a pen. I have a pen, Mr. President. Use my pen to sign the bill." People used to believe in this. And then he says, "Thanks very much." No, keep it. Keep my pen. No, the President of the United States will be using my pen, right? Now, so you can at least imagine the feeling, right? It's a novel where you can imagine it. So now it's precisely because of that person's greatness that you feel tremendously privileged to be associated with him. Okay, now let's take it a step further. Let's suppose that he says, "You know what I'm trying to do. You know what I'm trying to do for mankind, for the planet, for history. You know what I'm trying to do. I've seen you. I've looked at you, and I think that you can help me. If you come and work with me, and I'll support you. You come and work with me, we'll work on it together. We'll work on nuclear fusion together, with which case we will solve all the energy problems of the planet. No more fossil fuels, no more pollution. The whole planet will be saved. Come and work on it with me." How would you feel? I think you would feel overwhelmed by the opportunity. And if he said to you, "I've been looking at you, I've been looking at your record, I've been looking at your capabilities, you could really help me, I'm asking you to help me." He's asking you to join him in a partnership in doing this great thing for the world. I think that would be a basis of love, because he, with his greatness, reached out to you. He reached out to you. He invited you into a relationship with him. I think a natural response to that would be love. This is where awe leads to love, when you add in the ingredient that he who possesses the awesome nature has invited us into that relationship. But of course, that's the whole Torah. The whole Torah is inviting us into that relationship. Under this condition, it's precisely the awe that supports the love. And then the other way around, it's precisely the love that generates the awe and fear of losing the love. In this way, the two mutually reinforce one another. And this, I think, is the way to look at it, where what the Rambam is describing is the way in which you get there, which may be incompatible in process, but in the end, what you do accomplish is not incompatible. Questions up to here? Yeah.
Does it also work the same way with the Goyim?
With what, sorry?
With the Goyim?
Does it work the same way with Goy? Well, first of all, non-Jews do not have the mitzvos to love him and have awe and fear for him. They don't have those mitzvos. On the other hand, you could say non-Jews if they do perform mitzvos, whatever mitzvahs they do, they get credit for them. They get credit as if they were not obligated, but they do get credit. So you ask, would you're talking about the Romans' description how to get there? I think it could, because even mitzvos, some people are not aware of this, there is a part of Torah that non-Jews should learn. The parts of Torah that are relevant to their service of God, they should learn. Indeed, the Gemara says that a non-Jew who learns Torah is greater than a high priest who's an ignoramus.
Oh.
Greater than a Jew. Yes, a non-Jew could be greater than a Jew. But of course, that refers to the mitzvahs that apply to them. When you teach Torah to people, if you're going to have non-Jews in the audience, you should ask a shaila. I did when I taught in university. I taught a course on Judaism, and the psak then, in the name of Rav Moshe Zechus Bracha, was if you have more Jews, if you have a lot of Jews there, then you can teach even though non-Jews are there. But if a non-Jew asks you to teach him Torah, then you should teach him the parts of Torah that are relevant to his practice, which can be all the stories of the book of Genesis, because they teach you God's providence and God's justice and God's care and the special nature of the Jewish people, which he should believe in, and so forth and so on. I mean, so there's a lot there that they can, and through the study of Torah, they could definitely come to appreciate the same things the Rambam is talking about. Now, so we're together. Now, another thing, I misread this in a certain way for a long time. Yeah, sorry.
In the case of the president, so let's say you offer the president your pen, and you feel like you're privileged to be able to offer the president the pen, it would be a different scenario if the president gave you that pen, if it was really the president's pen, and you offer the president's pen back to the president. In the same way, Hashem created our entire circumstance. So it's sometimes one can feel not like it's a partnership, but it's just a there's almost an obligation, or this not really two independent agents offering mutual services, but I'm struggling to find the words, the alternative, but
okay, let's see. You're saying that if the pen had been given to me by the president in the first place, then the gesture wouldn't have the same meaning. I think you're right, but I don't think it's. Let's see how it's going to impact what we're talking about. My emphasis was not so much on giving him a piece of property, but on being invited into a certain relationship. I was using the gift of the pen just as an example of what it means to have participation. You know, I made a contribution to the project. Now, you know, you can give a gift to your parents, even though you only exist because of your parents bringing you into the world. That doesn't mean you can't give a gift to your parents. What you have under your control, which is under the control of your will, and you provide it for somebody else and give up your control over it, is really a gift. That's the whole idea of having free will. So I don't think that it's lost. I agree with you that we shouldn't falsely picture ourselves as independent. I think that's right. For example, let's take you're living in a bubble on the moon, and there's a guy who's responsible for oxygen. He provides the bubble with oxygen. No oxygen, everybody's dead. Are you independent? Oh no, that guy's providing the oxygen. You're not independent of him. That doesn't mean you can't give him a gift. You depend upon him, but it doesn't mean you can't give him a gift. You give him a gift of something that he doesn't have. He's telling you he wants your participation in the project. He wants your participation in the project. You have free will. If you say no, he's not going to get what he wants. That's one level of our picture of how God works. That's only part of the level.
So the pen that we have, in some sense, is the will that we have?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yes.
So when Hashem gave us the Torah on Har Sinai, he asked everyone else. He asked all of the other infinite loyalties he created, and then chose us. So the idea of free will for us is using our bechira in the same way to then choose him. right? But we also have love and fear for him. So at Har Sinai, was there just love, or was there sort of a fear that we would use our bechira for other things too?
Let's see. Let's try to get this straight out. First of all, you say he offered the Torah to other people, right? That's what you said. Other nations, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it wasn't the question of choosing one. The goal was not to choose one. The goal was that everyone should say yes, and the whole of mankind received the Torah together. It wasn't a question of finding a chosen people. It should have been there was no chosen people at all. There was just humanity. That was the goal. He was rebuffed again and again and again because of the choices that they made. And that was the fourth in a series of attempts that the Creator made, that there should be one homogeneous humanity. God did not set up a two-tiered system with an upper group and a lower group. He didn't do that. In the Garden of Eden, had they passed the test, there would have been only one humanity. There would have been an upper group and a lower group. And so it was after that as well. That was the fourth chance. That's one thing. And then, remember, the beginning of the Torah is when we received the commandments. So it's not a question of asking whether we had love and yira at the time when we received the commandments. When we received the commandments, that was time to start working on them. Right? So the question of whether they had them there at Sinai is not the right question. But I will say that the process of giving the Torah at Sinai was designed specifically to create yira. And here you have a famous, in our commentaries, something that sounds almost absurd at the outset, a machlekes, a difference of opinion between Moses and God. God gave the Torah at Sinai, and we all experienced that event. Immediately thereafter, the leaders of the people said to Moses, never again. We don't want this again. You be the intermediary. You go up, you hear from God what He wants to tell you, and you come down and tell us, and we'll do it that way instead. So Rashi explains Moses' reaction. That's a chazal. Moses' reaction. You made me weak. Yes, in the Rashi it says like a woman. You can take that as you like. You made me weak like a woman. I saw that you were not trembling, charedim, trembling with desire to draw close to Him out of love. Wouldn't it have been better for you to hear the rest of the Torah from Him directly rather than through me? That's the rabbinic record of Moses' reaction to their request. But God's reaction was entirely different. God says, Heitivu kol shediberu. Everything they said was very good. Everything they said was very good. Who would give, as if God was offering a wish, who would give, who would provide that they should have this heart with them forever to stand in yira of me and to keep my will and do my mitzvahs? So you hear the essential difference between Moses and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Moses says, I was distressed by the fact that you weren't desirous of drawing close to God in love. You weren't desiring to draw close to God in love. Why didn't you want to be close to Him in love? Wouldn't it have been better to hear from Him than from me? God says, Moses, you're off track. You're off track. I didn't want love. I wanted yira. I wanted yira. And I produced yira. And that's what I wanted. And who would guarantee for me that the people should stand in yira of me forever and do my will? So in terms of what was actually there, for almost everybody, it was yira. Now remember, the mountain is on fire. The ground is shaking underneath your feet. There's cloud, there's smoke, there's the sound of the shofar blasting. You know, the world is coming apart. Not to mention what the oral tradition says about what was going on there. So it was designed to produce this kind of yira, and it did produce this kind of yira. And I think there's a tremendous message here, because I think that most Svarim say that Ahava is higher than Yira. Love is higher, harder to achieve. Very few people achieve it well, and those who achieve it sometimes achieve it only intermittently. Sometimes you have the love, but you don't have it continuously. Yira is much easier to achieve. It's a kind of bottom layer, and then you climb from there to love. In that order. Now, although the Rambam's order is going from love to fear, but that's for a different reason, I think. But in terms of the actual production of the midos, Yira is much easier. Let me explain briefly why. I mean, I'm going to use information that you're all aware of. I think it applies here. The Yira is both fear and awe. Awe means something that's, in my mind, incomparably great. Okay, let's just take creation out of nothing. The latest estimate of the number of stars in the universe, last one I saw, is 10 to the 22. That means a 1 with 22 zeros. That's a lot! And they came into existence because God said, let them exist, so they exist. Who's on top of the technological world? MIT? IBM? Give me a grain of sand. Give me an atom from nothing. It's not there. There's something called conservation of mass energy. You have certain mass energy, you do experimental changes, it's the same when it comes out. Supposedly, quantum mechanics, yes, no, okay. But you can't do it. That's pretty impressive. Just, it shall be and it be. Then you take, you say, I'm going to say to IBM, I want you to create for me a robot. This robot should be mobile. It should be able to absorb energy from the environment. It should be able to, it has senses, and it senses the environment. It can work together with others of its same type to build vast, complex structures like beehives or ant hills, ant tunnels, or termite mounds that could be 20 feet tall, and so forth and so on. And it can reproduce, make copies of itself. And all the programming of this robot should be in the head of a pin. That's an ant. Let's hear it, IBM. Next year? Next decade? I don't think it's forthcoming. So there's a lot that's very, very subtle going on in the world. Very complex, which bespeaks, as the Rambam says, gigantic wisdom. Gigantic. And we're uncovering more of it all the time. I just read an article today. That women are born with all the eggs they'll ever have. Men produce sperm all the time, but women are born with all the eggs they'll ever have. And they're kept in a kind of immature state, and when then they become mature, and they can be used for reproduction. That means the egg could be there 30 years or 40 years before it's used. What prevents it from deteriorating? There's a process in metabolism which causes the deterioration of DNA. Because in metabolizing, using energy to keep the cell alive, there's a certain process which creates free electrons, which then become ions, charged particles, and the charged particles attack and destroy the DNA. What stops that? Well, they just did a new research now, and they discovered that in the egg, that type of metabolism doesn't occur. It's a different metabolism. In that cell only, it goes around the corner and doesn't produce the free electrons. It's just astonishing. Every time you look, there's something else new that's absolutely astonishing going on. I can give you 10 dozen examples. I study this stuff. I like to keep up with this stuff in biology. So you see enormous wisdom. And by the way, the 20th century hope, the prayer, the goal of a simple scientific picture of the world. Remember the atomists of the Greeks. The world is just pebbles banging around. That's all it is. Pebbles are simple. They just bang around and make combinations. They're different ones of different kinds. Make different combinations. That's how we explain everything. It's a simple picture. Well, it isn't. Because the building blocks are quantum. And the quantum things are totally ununderstood. You can predict what they do, but you don't know why they do it. So it got more complex, more subtle, more mysterious the further down you got. Then it gets simpler. Picture got worse, much worse. So if you just now picture the agent that's responsible for the entirety of creation and the subtlety, complexity, the challenging nature of the things that we discover about the world, assuming that they're true, which is a big assumption. It's false for many of the things we think are true. It's not difficult to achieve a level of yira, of awe for the Creator. And then, when you add that to what's happened in history, which we have very good reason to accept, as I argued at length in my book, let's take just the public massive miracles, whether it's the plagues in Egypt or the splitting of the sea or the giving of the Torah at Sinai or the manna, whatever it is. So this is an agency that interacts with human beings, and I don't want to say it intervenes in the world, because intervenes implies that the rest of the time it's on vacation. And that's not our view. Kadosh Baruch Hu is giving existence to the world in general and piece by piece all the time, and thereby infusing it with energy and guiding it, directing it, what it shall do. So he's surrounding us with his activity, so to speak. It's not difficult to be in awe of such an existence. And that's a finite slice of an infinite existence. It's not nothing, contrary to some ways that mathematicians would talk. It's not nothing, but it is a finite slice of an infinite existence. And that being the case, developing yira, developing awe, is something which I think is not too difficult to do. And that's why the sources stress awe. That's why God was so pleased with the Jewish people when the response to the giving of the Torah was awe. Awe and fear, yira. Because that's what he wanted to accomplish. That's a bedrock. That's a bedrock that can save you when, for example, I'll talk about this in a second. When love isn't available. Why would love be not available? Love requires a certain amount of identification. You can't love an ex. You can't love an unknown. Love means sharing. It means identifying. It means being able to be committed to or dedicated to the other. Awe can be generated by seeing some things that are clearly beyond your capabilities, where you can't imagine how they're done, and then imagining there are other things, so-and-so's unknowns. There are things beyond which are being done that I can't know, and I certainly can't understand how they can be done, and I just see that this is unbelievably greater than I am. Awe tolerates a great deal of ignorance. Love is measured by the amount of knowledge and understanding you have, and the amount of commitment that you can have. And there are times in individuals' lives, and there are times certainly in history, where love becomes very difficult. Because what's happening is something which you can't relate to. It's something which you can't grasp. It's something you can't put into your framework for your understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son Isaac, and he carries out the command until he's stopped at the last moment, but he carries out the command, and God credits him with success in his mission. He says, "Ati yadati ki yirei Elokim ata." Now I know that you have yira for me. Now the Sfarim all point out that Abraham is described as Avraham Ohavi. Abraham's the one who loves me. That's his characteristic. That's his orientation. That's his character essence. If here it says, "Now I know," and by the way, "now I know" means now I have made known. Rashi points that out on the basis of grammar. Pure grammar. Now I have made known that you have yira for me, or for me, right? Means that love alone couldn't do it. Abraham's characteristic is love. He's not credited here with an exquisite love that drove him to do it. No, there had to be an element of yira. Why? Because this challenge was framed in a way to short-circuit Abraham's understanding of what the Kodesh Baruch Hu is and what he wants. It was done in such a way as to disconnect his understanding from it. So, for example, and this is what all this for him talk about, God had prior made a promise to Abraham that Isaac will be his continuation. And now he's telling him to kill him when Isaac has no children. That's an out-and-out contradiction. So much so that some commentators, like the Shloh, say that he would have been justified in doing either one, killing him or not killing him. Because he has two statements on record from the Creator. He can't make both of them true. So, without any further information, he could do either one that he wants. That's why, says the Ran, God says to him, please do this for me. Because the Ran says, God says, I know I can't command you. It won't help. Because if I command you, and you'll say, you commanded me this yesterday, I can't put the two of them together. I can't overcome that steer in your mind. I can't do that, so I'm asking you to do it. So and then, if that's the point, if Abraham is confronting a contradiction is where understanding stops. No such thing as understanding a contradiction. And don't take the existentialist way out, which I heard from some Israeli who used to be considered a chacham over here, that you're celebrating a trans reason. You're going to the point where the human mind can't grasp. Ultimately, everything. Thank you very much. The Torah is a way of Kodesh Baruch Hu representing himself in the world and revealing himself in the world so that we can understand. But not this now. Not this now. After it was called off, so Abraham could understand what the exercise was worth. But he didn't know it was going to be called off. So the exercise is, can you and will you and how will you respond to me when I give you something to do that you can't understand? At least right now you can't understand it. Here, Ahava alone will not sustain you. Love alone will not sustain you, because love requires identification. Love requires sharing. So here it's got to be awe. It's got to be awe that says, I trust that there's something here beyond my understanding. To do it out of strictly out of love is not in the question. So, that being the case, that's why there'll be times when love is beyond the person. Even though Abraham's awe was built on love, but here it couldn't be just pure love. It couldn't be done out of pure love. So I think that's why the attitude that Kodesh Baruch Hu expressed at Har Sinai was, I want Yira to be the platform. I want it to be the foundation on which people can stand. That it can be reliable. And it can be something which they can invest in and create for themselves, and can be a constant in their lives. And love is something which they can strive to achieve from time to time. And of course, the more that you achieve it, the better it is. But it's something which is much more difficult, and by its very nature, there may be times when love is going to be out of reach. Yeah.
So if love is predicated on understanding, and then the primary way to test love is to remove understanding, then what is the analogous test for Yira?
I mean, the second part I didn't say. I didn't say you were testing love. You're testing the person.
Testing the person.
But hold on, stop a second. Those are two entirely different propositions, right? You're testing the person to see whether he can go beyond just pure love. Okay. After all, there are two mitzvos. There are two mitzvos. They're both required and both necessary.
So how do you test a person to go beyond fear?
Fear is not so difficult, because you can go to places which are fearful because God tells you to go. But awe, would you go beyond awe? I don't know that you would go beyond awe. you might have to go to places where you have to struggle to express your awe. I mean, in Abraham's case, I think it's a good example, especially for certain prejudices nowadays, when you have to give up your understanding. To give up your understanding. Now, as you go on in life, you may see people, this is something which happens to many people, see a person facing a problem, and he's using a strategy to overcome the problem, and you see right away that this isn't the right strategy. Right? Now, why is he doing that? I'll tell you why he's doing it. Because that strategy is a good strategy. And it works 90% of the time. He's not just crazy. He's not just prejudiced. No, he's relying on something that works 90% of the time. But this time it's not the right strategy. That's what he's missing. So a person who uses his intellect, and his intellect takes it to good places, and then suddenly something's facing him, and his intellect has to be short-circuited, he has to go beyond his intellect, just turn it off, that can be a great challenge to him. And that is part of what it means, I know now that you are able to operate out of my overwhelming, unimaginable greatness than you, and submit yourself to me because of that, without your having understanding. So the test there is to hang on to the yira in the face of a personal challenge, which would make it very difficult for you to do. But to go beyond yira, it's nice. Your point's a nice point, and I certainly hadn't thought of it.
Another way to ask the question is, how is Yitzhak, who embodies yira, how was he tested?
Oh, he was tested. Rav Dessler has a wonderful. He has a series of essays on the Parshios, and he says that there was a case where Isaac, he became a farmer for a brief period of time, and he had a gigantic crop, 100 times as much as could possibly be expected. And he was living with the Philistines at the time, and the Philistines grew jealous of him, and they expelled him, and they went out onto the countryside, and he dug wells. Now, the story is told like this. He planted, and he received 100-fold what he expected, and the Philistines grew envious of him. And, historical footnote, the wells which Abraham had dug in previous times had been filled up by the Philistines. And the Philistines came to him and said, "You've become much greater than we, much more prosperous than we. You have to leave us." And he leaves them, and he goes out into the countryside. And then it says, "And the wells which Abraham dug and the Philistines filled up, Isaac dug them again, and he called them by the names that his father had called them." So careful reader says, why does it tell me the history of the Philistines filling up the wells twice? And in particular, the first time is the middle of the story. He's living with the Philistines, becomes rich, they envy him. Pause! By the way, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there were wells. They filled them up. Should know that. Yeah, there were wells. Back to the story. Oh, you're so greater than us, greater than we are. Get out of here. Kick him out. Goes out of the countryside. Why the pause there? You're going to say about the wells in the next sentence. And the wells were filled up, and so on and so on, and he dug them. So Rav Dessler says, what it's telling you is this. You want to know why things happen, right? Why was he kicked out? Because he became wealthy. Okay. Why did he become wealthy? It's clearly miraculous. Why did he become wealthy? He became wealthy because the wells needed to be dug. That's why he became wealthy. And that's why they kicked him out so that he would dig the wells. Now let's think. Whose wells? Abraham's wells. What names does he call them? Abraham's names. What is a well? Something that gives water free. It just gives and gives and gives and gives. That's love. This is where he had to acquire the characteristic of love. I think that's one of the many thrilling things that Rav Dessler has written. Absolutely beautiful. And the diuk, the analysis, the language in that story. When I read Rav Dessler, I read the story 100 times. I didn't see anything. So he too was tested, and it goes on to his analysis of the case of Avraham also. He was tested to go beyond just Yira. So maybe that's now. Let me sort of answering your question. Yeah, because love is a characteristic that's different from and independent of Yira to a great extent. So going beyond Yira would mean taking a person who's superb in Yira and putting him in a situation where he has to develop something else other than Yira. I should have thought of that. I think that would be the answer to the question. It is symmetrical. It is symmetrical. Very good. Very good. Yeah, it is symmetrical. Okay. We're together. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention to you is if you want to start the process, you should read about people who did express Ahava and Yira in different ways to get a sense of what that means in practice and to get some inspiration from it. I'll finish by telling you a story, one of my favorite stories. Simcha Wasserman lived in the United States. A certain period of time, he and his Rebbe lived in Detroit, and he was invited to open a kollel in Los Angeles. And he was promised that somebody would take care of the money and he would just have to teach. So they went out there, they set it up, and they started teaching. And after a not long period of time, the person was promised the money, couldn't hold it, and he had to start raising money for the kollel, which was very difficult. And it got to the point where it was desperate. So she said, I'll go back to Detroit and I'll work there and I'll try to send some money. She did, and they were separated, and he was holding on to the kollel. At a certain point in time, he called her up and he said, listen, we tried, we put in our best efforts, it's not going. Not everything is meant to succeed. I'll come back to Detroit and we'll pick up the lives that we had before. She said, we have no children. They never had any children. Who could go to Los Angeles? Anybody with children can't go because there's no education for children there. Maybe this is something that we should do. So he stayed. And eventually it was successful. She came out, Rav Mendel Weinbach, one of the founders of Ohr Somayach, was there when she came out for Pesach. And they were rejoined in the kollel. Now, let's look at this from her point of view. She has no children, a woman without children. Rachel Imenu, Rachel says, give me children or I die. What was her attitude? Was her attitude, you've crippled me, you've crushed me, you've left me without a life? No. Her attitude was, I have no children. What mitzvah can I do that someone else can't do? What can I do for a Kadosh Baruch Hu that someone else can't do? That's ahava. That's love. I love you. I trust you. If this is where you put me, then this is what I need. And my only thought is, given my unique circumstances, what can I do for you that other people can't do? That's an expression of ahava, of love. So read about people who expressed both ahava and yira, and in that way you get a picture of how it works in practice and the inspiration. Because Baruch Hu should give us the ability to grow and move in those directions.